They told me my late mother left nothing but a boarded-up cottage. What I found inside changed everything. If you've ever felt like your past was a closed book, you might want to stick around for this. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in second chances, because that's what this story is all about. The day I turned 18 was the day I legally ceased to exist as a ward of the state. There was no cake, no party, just a cardboard box containing 2 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I no longer read, and a manila envelope full of paperwork that amounted to my official identity. Mr. Henderson, the director of the group home, slid the box across his laminated desk with the same weary indifference he applied to everything. He'd seen dozens of kids like me come and go. We were inventory. "So, that's it, Leo," he said, leaning back in his chair, which squeaked in protest. "You're a free man. Got your final check from the state, your social security card, your birth certificate, everything you need to start paying taxes." He attempted a smile, a brief, tired twitch of his lips. It was a subtle, institutional kind of humor, the kind that dies under fluorescent lights. I didn't smile back. I just nodded, my hands tracing the worn edges of the box. For 12 years, my life had been a series of scheduled movements. Breakfast at 7, school at 8, curfew at 9. Now, the schedule was a blank page, and it was terrifying. Freedom felt less like an open door and more like being pushed off a cliff. "There is one other thing," he said, fishing a crisp white envelope from a wire basket on his desk. It looked alien amongst the sea of beige and gray government forms. "This came for you, from a law firm." I took it from him. The paper was thick, expensive. My name was typed on the front, Leo Vance. Below it, an address for a firm called Albright and Associates. I'd never heard of them. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "No idea, mister," Henderson said, already turning his attention to a stack of files. "They just said it was important, pertaining to the estate of Sarah Vance." The name hit me like a physical blow. Sarah Vance. My mother. A woman I remembered only in fractured, dreamlike images. The scent of rain on asphalt. The sound of her humming a song I couldn't recall. The rough texture of her wool coat against my cheek. She had disappeared from my life when I was 6, leaving me in the care of a system that raised me with paperwork and procedure instead of love. The official story was abandonment. The story I told myself was that I wasn't worth staying for. I spent my first night of freedom in a cheap motel by the highway, the kind where the television is bolted to the dresser and the Gideon's Bible is missing half its pages. The roar of trucks outside was a constant, lonely hum. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed and held the letter, turning it over and over in my hands. An estate. The word sounded grand, important. It conjured images of mansions and trust funds, things from movies. It couldn't possibly have anything to do with my mother. The woman in my memories was a ghost who worked 2 jobs and always seemed to be running from something. Finally, I tore it open. The language was dense, full of legal terms I didn't understand. Testamentary disposition, intestate succession, fiduciary duties. But the gist of it was clear. I was to report to the office of Ms. Eleanor Albright to discuss the settlement of my mother's assets. The next morning, I took a bus downtown. The law office was in one of those glass towers that scraped the sky, a world away from the cracked linoleum and peeling paint of the group home. I felt small and out of place in my worn jeans and faded hoodie. The receptionist looked me up and down, her expression a carefully neutral mask that still managed to convey disapproval. Ms. Albright, however, was different. She was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun that somehow didn't look severe on her. She didn't wear a suit, just a simple black dress. She shook my hand firmly and led me into a corner office with a staggering view of the city. "Leo," she said, gesturing for me to sit, "thank you for coming. I was your mother's attorney." The words felt impossible. My mother had a lawyer? "Toward the end, yes," she said, her tone calm and pragmatic. She folded her hands on the polished surface of her desk. "I'll be direct with you. Your mother's estate is not substantial. In fact, by most metrics, it's a liability." She slid a file across the desk. I opened it. Inside were photographs of a small, dilapidated house. The windows were boarded over with weathered plywood. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired old horse. The paint was peeling in long, curling strips, revealing gray, splintered wood beneath. It was surrounded by a riot of overgrown weeds and skeletal trees. It looked less like a home and more like a place that had been forgotten on purpose. "She owned a cottage," Ms. Albright explained, "out in a place called Stone Creek. It's remote, about a 4-hour bus ride from here. She inherited it from her own grandmother. It's been in your family for generations." I stared at the pictures. This was my inheritance? A ruin, a monument to decay. It felt like a final insult from the woman who had left me with nothing. "As I said, it's a liability," she continued, her voice pulling me from my thoughts. "The property is in significant disrepair. More importantly, there are back taxes owed, 5 years' worth. It comes to a little over $7,000. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. $7,000? I have $312 to my name. That was the sum total of my state-provided severance from childhood. "I'm aware of your financial situation," she said, her expression softening with something that might have been sympathy. "Which brings me to this." She produced another document, this one with the letterhead of a company called Oakwood Development. They've been trying to buy up land in that area for a new resort project. They've made an offer on your mother's property. She turned the paper around for me to see. They were offering $25,000. "They know about the tax lien," she said. "This offer is conditional on a clean title, so the $7,000 would be paid out of the sale price. You would walk away with roughly $18,000 after my fees." $18,000. The number was dizzying. It was a fortune. It was a new life. It was a security deposit on an apartment, new clothes, a bus ticket to anywhere. It was the answer to every terrified question that had been screaming in my head for the last 24 hours. It was the logical choice, the only choice. "They see the land, not the house," Ms. Albright said. "They'll tear it down, of course. They just want the 2 acres it sits on." Tear it down. Erase it. A part of me felt a grim satisfaction at the thought. Let them. Let them wipe away this last pathetic piece of her, just as she had wiped herself away from me. "I have the paperwork right here," she said gently, sliding a pen and a contract toward me. "You can sign it now. The money would be in your account within a week." I looked at the pen. My hand trembled as I reached for it. This was it. The clean break. The end of a story I never wanted to be a part of. I could sign the paper, take the money, and never look back. I could finally be free of the ghost of Sarah Vance. But my fingers stopped just short of the pen.
A strange, stubborn thought surfaced in the back of my mind. It was a quiet, insistent whisper. Before you erase it, you should see it. Before you sell her last trace on this earth, you owe it to yourself to stand where she stood.
"I want to see it first," I said, the words surprising me as much as they did her. Ms. Albright raised an eyebrow. "Leo, the pictures don't lie. It's not in good condition. The trip is long, and honestly, there's nothing there for you." "I know," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of conviction. "But I have to see it, before I sign." She studied my face for a long moment, her sharp eyes searching for something. I don't know what she found, but she gave a slow, deliberate nod. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, tarnished brass key tied to a faded piece of red yarn. "Very well," she said, her voice neutral. "The bus to Stone Creek leaves from the downtown terminal at 8 a.m. It only runs once a day. This is the only key." She wrote the address on a sticky note and handed it to me. "Be careful, Leo. It's a place that holds on to the past." The bus ride was exactly as long and uncomfortable as she'd implied. It was an old machine, groaning and rattling its way out of the city's concrete maze. I watched the skyscrapers shrink in the grimy window, replaced by an endless sprawl of suburbs, then strip malls, and finally wide, flat expanses of farmland. The other passengers were a quiet, weary collection of souls. An elderly woman with a netted bag of groceries, a young man in a paint-splattered work uniform who fell asleep as soon as the bus started moving, a mother trying to quiet a restless child. I felt invisible among them, just another person in transit from one life to another. I stared at my own reflection, superimposed over the passing landscape. It was a stranger's face, thin and pale, with eyes that looked older than 18. For my entire life, I had defined myself by what I lacked. A father I never knew, a mother who left, a home that was never a home. I was a collection of absences. Now I was heading toward another absence, a derelict cottage that represented the final, definitive proof of my mother's abandonment. Why was I even doing this? The logical part of my brain screamed at me to go back, sign the papers, take the money. But something deeper, something more primal, kept me pinned to that vibrating seat. The landscape began to change again. The flat fields gave way to rolling hills, then dense forests of pine and oak. The sky seemed to get bigger, wider. The bus wheezed its way up winding roads, the air growing cooler, cleaner. After nearly 4 hours, the driver called out, "Stone Creek!" I grabbed my single backpack and stepped off the bus into what felt like a different century. The town was little more than a crossroads. A single blinking traffic light swayed in the breeze. On one corner stood a gas station with old-fashioned pumps. On another, a general store with a wooden porch and a faded Coca-Cola sign. A handful of houses were scattered nearby. That was it. The air was filled with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It was so quiet I could hear the buzz of a fly. I went into the general store to ask for directions. An old man with a face like a weathered map sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He looked up at me over his glasses. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I'm looking for this address," I said, showing him the sticky note from Ms. Albright. He squinted at it. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. "The old Vance place. Haven't had anyone ask about that in years. You family?" "Her son," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth. The man's expression shifted. He looked at me more closely, a long, searching gaze. "Well, I'll be," he murmured. "You've got her eyes." He gave me the directions. It was another 2 miles out of town, down a dirt road that wasn't well maintained. He warned me to watch for potholes. The walk was long. The paved road quickly turned to gravel, and then to a rutted dirt track that was more weed than road. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches interlocking overhead, creating a dark, green tunnel. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of my footsteps and the cawing of crows. It felt like I was walking off the edge of the world. And then I saw it. The cottage was set back from the road, half swallowed by the encroaching forest. The photographs hadn't done it justice. They hadn't captured the profound sense of loneliness that clung to the place like ivy. The wood of the walls was silvered with age and weather. The porch tilted at a drunken angle. The plywood over the windows looked like blindfolds on a condemned man. It was exactly what Ms. Albright had said. A ruin. Nothing. I walked up the creaking porch steps, my feet sinking slightly with each one. I tried the brass key in the lock of the front door. It slid in, but wouldn't turn. The wood of the door had swollen in the damp air, sealing it shut. I pushed against it, my shoulder straining, but it didn't budge. It was a house that didn't want to be entered. Frustrated, I circled the building, pushing through thorny bushes and thick weeds. I found a small window on the side, its wooden board looking slightly looser than the others. I wedged my fingers into the gap between the board and the frame and pulled. The wood was soft with rot. I heaved with all my strength, my muscles screaming in protest. With a long, groaning screech of rusty nails, the board ripped free. I peered into the darkness within. The air that wafted out was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time, of dust and decay and forgotten things. I hoisted myself up and through the small opening, dropping onto the floor inside with a thud that sent dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light from the uncovered window. I was in a small kitchen. A thick layer of dust covered everything, a gray shroud over a formica table, a rusty sink, and an ancient-looking stove. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like ghostly chandeliers. I moved slowly, my footsteps muffled by the dust. Each room was a portrait of abandonment. A living room with a single armchair, its stuffing spilling out from a tear in the fabric. A bathroom with a rust-stained tub. And finally, a bedroom. It was the smallest room in the house. A simple iron bed frame stood against one wall, stripped of its mattress. A small wooden dresser was in the corner. The air in here felt different, heavier. This was her room. This was where she slept. This was the heart of the loneliness. I ran my hand along the dusty dresser. It felt like I was touching a gravestone. I was about to leave, to go back to town and catch the first bus out of this miserable place, when my foot snagged on something. I looked down. One of the floorboards near the bed was slightly raised. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a fraction of an inch higher than the others. My heart started to beat a little faster. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the silence. I dug my fingernails into the crack and lifted. The board came up easily, with no sound. It had been cut intentionally. Beneath it, nestled in the dark, dusty space between the floor joists, was a metal box. It was an old ammunition case, painted olive drab, with a heavy latch on the front. It wasn't large, but it was solid, heavy. I lifted it out. It was cold to the touch. I sat on the dusty floor, the single beam of light from the window illuminating the box on my lap. My hands were shaking as I worked the latch. It was stiff with rust, but finally It sprang open with a loud click that echoed in the silent house. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money, no jewelry, nothing of monetary value. Instead, it was filled to the brim with letters. Stacks and stacks of them, written on thin, yellowing paper, tied together in neat bundles with faded twine. On top of the first bundle was a single, untied envelope. Written on the front in elegant, looping handwriting were 2 words: "For Leo." My breath caught in my throat. I picked up the envelope. It was addressed to me. I opened it with trembling fingers and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The same handwriting covered the page. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it means you are finally home. I know you must have so many questions. I know you must hate me. I need you to know that not a day has gone by, not a single hour, that I have not thought of you. Not a night has passed that I haven't dreamed of your face. Leaving you was not an abandonment. It was a sacrifice, the hardest and most necessary thing I have ever done." I had to stop reading, my vision blurring with tears I didn't know I had. I wiped them away angrily and forced myself to continue. "Your father was a good man, Leo, but he made a terrible mistake. He borrowed money from a very dangerous person to start his business, a man named Silas Thorne. When the business failed, your father couldn't pay him back. Thorne doesn't run a bank, my love. He runs on fear. After your father died, the debt became mine. Thorne and his people, they came to our apartment. They made threats. Not just to me. They talked about you. They described your school, your walk home. They knew everything." The dusty air in the room felt thick, hard to breathe. I could almost feel the cold dread she must have felt. I went to the police, but they couldn't do anything. Thorne was clever. There was no paper trail, no evidence, just his reputation. I knew I couldn't protect you if we stayed together. He would have used you to control me, to hurt me. So I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I disappeared. And I made you disappear too. I put you into the system, knowing they would move you, change your name for a while, keep you safe in a way I no longer could. I told myself it was like a witness protection program. It was the only way to break the trail, to make sure Thorne's people could never find you. I came here, to your great-grandmother's cottage, this forgotten place. I boarded it up, lived like a ghost. I worked odd jobs for cash in the next town over, saved every penny. I spent every waking moment thinking of you, writing to you, even though I knew I could never send the letters. This box, Leo, this box is my life. It's the story of the years we lost. I need you to read them. I need you to understand. This house isn't a ruin. It's a fortress. It was my sanctuary, and I pray that one day it can be yours. Don't let them take it. It's all I have to give you. It's everything. All my love, forever, Mom. I let the letter fall from my fingers. A sound escaped my chest, a raw, ragged noise that was half sob, half scream. The story of my life, the one I had built around the central pillar of my mother's rejection, had just been dynamited. She hadn't left me. She had hidden me. She hadn't abandoned me. She had saved me. The grief was a tidal wave. I cried for the 6-year-old boy left alone in a sterile office, convinced he was unlovable. I cried for the teenager who built walls of anger and indifference to protect his broken heart. And I cried for her, for the woman who had lived out her days in this dusty, lonely house, writing letters to a son she couldn't see, all to keep him safe. The sheer weight of her love, a love I had never known existed, was crushing. I sat there on the floor for hours, the light from the window slowly fading until the room was cast in deep shadow. The silence of the house was no longer oppressive. It was reverent. It was the silence of a place that had held a long and painful secret. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a jarring intrusion from the outside world. It was a text from Ms. Albright. "Leo, just checking in. Have you had a chance to reconsider the offer? Oakwood is getting impatient." I looked at the text, the glowing screen illuminating the dusty air. $18,000. The offer felt disgusting now. It was blood money. They wanted to bulldoze this place, this fortress built of a mother's love, and put up a golf course or a luxury spa. They wanted to erase her sacrifice for a profit margin. But the fear was still there. The $18,000 was a tangible escape. It was a path to a normal life, free from tax liens and collapsing roofs and the ghosts of dangerous men. I was 18 years old, with no job, no prospects, and a few $100s to my name. What was I supposed to do? Live here? Fight a man like Silas Thorne? It was insane. This is the point where a story can break you, when the truth you've uncovered is so big, so world-altering, that you don't know how to carry it. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where everything you thought you knew about your life, about your family, turned out to be wrong? It feels like the ground beneath your feet has vanished. If you're nodding your head right now, if this is hitting you in a real way, I want you to know you're not alone. The people in this community, the ones who watch these stories, we get it. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to rewrite your own history. Because in that moment, sitting in the dark, I knew I had a choice to make. I could take the easy money and run, or I could stay and honor the truth. My choice came in the form of the other letters. I used my phone's flashlight to read them, one by one, bundle by bundle. They weren't just expressions of love and loss. They were a chronicle. She wrote about her days, the quiet terror, the constant watching. But she also wrote about her strength. She hadn't just been hiding, she had been fighting back. In a letter dated 2 years after she left me, she wrote, "Leo, I've started to follow him. Not literally, that would be too dangerous. But I've been digging. Old newspapers, public records. Thorne isn't just a loan shark. He's connected to real estate. He uses his threats to force people to sell their homes and businesses to shell companies he controls. Companies like Oakwood Development. He's a vulture, picking at the bones of this town." My blood ran cold. Oakwood Development, the company that wanted to buy this land. It wasn't a coincidence. They weren't just developers. They were him. They were still hunting her even after she was gone. They wanted to finish the job, to take the one thing she had managed to hold on to. Another letter, written just a year before she died, gave me the final piece of the puzzle. "My love, I think I've found something, a weakness. Your great-grandfather was a clever man. He built this house with his own hands, and he built secrets into it. There's a loose stone in the fireplace hearth behind the old wood stove. I'm putting everything there, all the evidence I've found. It's not much, but it might be enough. If you're reading this, it's for you to decide what to do with it. And there's something else there too, a little seed money, for the taxes, for a start, for our home." I scrambled to the living room. An ancient pot-bellied wood stove stood in front of a large stone fireplace.
I knelt down, running my hands over the rough hearthstones, my heart hammering against my ribs. One of them, on the left side, shifted slightly under my touch. I pried at it with my fingers. It was heavy, but it lifted out, revealing a dark, hollowed-out space beneath. Inside was another box, this one smaller, made of wood. I pulled it out and opened it. The contents were exactly as she'd described. There was a small black ledger book. I opened it. Inside, in my mother's neat handwriting, were names, dates, and amounts. A meticulous record of Thorne's victims, of the properties he'd strong-armed. There were also a few photographs of him meeting with men I didn't recognize, and a half-dozen old cassette tapes labeled with dates. And beneath it all, a thick brown envelope sealed with wax. I broke the seal. Inside was cash. Stacks of 20s and 50s bound with rubber bands.
I didn't count it right away, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it would be enough. Tucked into the stack was a final, small note. "Be brave, my Leo. Your love is my legacy." That was it. The decision was no longer a decision. It was a calling, a duty. I was not going to run. I was not going to sell. This land, this broken-down cottage, was not my inheritance. It was my inheritance, my mother's story, her fight, and now it was mine. I took out my phone. My hands were steady now. First, I called Ms. Albright. It was late, but she answered on the second ring. "Leo?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is different," I said, and my own voice sounded strange to me, deeper, more solid. "I'm not selling. I'm paying the back taxes. I'll wire the money to the county tax office tomorrow." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Leo," she said slowly, "are you sure about this? What changed your mind?" "I found some things my mother left for me," I said simply. "This is the right thing to do. Can you handle the legal side? Tell Oakwood the deal is off." I could almost hear her thinking, reassessing the situation, reassessing me. "All right, Leo," she said finally, a note of respect in her voice that hadn't been there before. "I'll take care of it, but be careful. These people don't like to be told no." "I know," I said. "Thank you." Next, I found the number for Oakwood Development from their letterhead. A man with a slick, professional voice answered. I asked for Mr. Davies, the name on the offer letter. "This is Davies?" "My name is Leo Vance," I said. "Regarding the property at 214 Stone Creek Road, I'm rejecting your offer." The slickness in his voice vanished, replaced by a hard, cold edge. "I think you're making a serious mistake, kid. That property is a teardown. It's worthless. Our offer is more than generous." "It's not for sale," I said, my voice unwavering. "Listen to me," he said, his voice dropping lower, laced with menace. "That land has a lot of complicated history. It's more trouble than it's worth. You should take the money and walk away. Start fresh somewhere else." It wasn't advice. It was a threat. "Thanks for the tip," I said, and I hung up. The first act of defiance sent a surge of adrenaline through me, a mix of terror and exhilaration. I was no longer a victim of my past. I was an active participant in my future. The next morning, I walked the 2 miles back into town. I wired the $7,000 to the county tax office from the general store, which also served as a post office and informal bank. The old man, George, watched me count out the cash with wide eyes. "Paying off your mother's debts," he said, more a statement than a question. He nodded slowly. "She was a good woman, quiet, kept to herself, but you could tell she had a steel backbone. Good to see she passed it on." That small piece of validation from a stranger felt like a medal. I bought a crowbar, a hammer, heavy-duty trash bags, and as many cleaning supplies as I could carry. For the next week, I worked from sunup to sundown. The first thing I did was tear the boards off every window. The sound of splintering wood was satisfying, each one an act of liberation. When I pulled the last board off the big window in the living room, sunlight flooded the space for the first time in over a decade, illuminating the swirling dust like a galaxy of tiny stars. It was a resurrection. The physical labor was a balm for my soul. I scrubbed floors, patched walls, and cleared the tangled weeds from the yard. With every swing of a hammer, with every bag of trash I hauled out, I felt like I was clearing away the sorrow and neglect, not just from the house, but from my own heart. I was building a home, and in doing so, I was rebuilding myself. A few of the locals started to notice. George from the store drove out one afternoon with a box of fresh vegetables from his garden. An older woman who lived down the road stopped by with a warm loaf of bread. They didn't ask many questions, they just offered small gestures of support, quiet acknowledgments that I belonged here. They were weaving me into the fabric of the community, one small thread at a time. One evening, after a long day of work, I sat on the newly repaired porch and found an old cassette player in one of the boxes of my mother's things I had found. I put in one of the tapes she had left. After a moment of static, I heard her voice. Not the voice from the letters, the one I had imagined, but her actual voice, clear and strong, though tinged with weariness. It was a recording of a conversation she'd had with one of Thorne's men. She was calm, defiant, refusing to be intimidated. Hearing her strength, her courage, filled me with a profound sense of purpose. This wasn't just my fight, it was ours. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. The cottage was no longer a ruin. It was simple, rustic, and scarred with the marks of its history, but it was clean and bright and solid. I had repaired the roof, gotten the water running, and even planted a small garden in the spot where my mother had once tried to grow tomatoes, according to one of her letters. The house was breathing again, and so was I. I sat on that porch, watching the sun set behind the tall pines, the air cool and clean. I thought about the word inheritance. I used to think it meant money, things, property, a transaction. But I was wrong. My inheritance wasn't this house or the land it sat on. My inheritance was a story. It was the truth of my mother's love, a love so fierce it had reshaped her life and saved mine. It was the legacy of her resilience, a quiet strength that had been passed down to me, waiting in the silence of this forgotten place until I was ready to claim it. They told me my mother left me nothing, but they were wrong. She left me everything that matters. She left me a home, not one made of wood and nails, but one made of truth and purpose. She left me a reason to fight. She left me the knowledge that I am the son of a woman with a steel backbone. The fight isn't over. I know that. I've given Ms. Albright the ledger and the tapes, and she's talking to people, to authorities who are finally willing to listen. The threat of Silas Thorne and his company still hangs in the air. But for the first time in my life, I'm not scared. Because I'm not running. I'm standing my ground, on my land, in my home. So many of us are haunted by the stories we're told about our families, about ourselves. Stories of abandonment, of not being good enough, of being worthless. But what if those stories aren't true? What if, buried underneath all that pain, there's a different story waiting to be discovered? A story of sacrifice, of protection, of a love so deep it's willing to look like its opposite. My journey started with a key to a broken-down house, but it led me to unlocking the truth of my own life. It taught me that home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you build, you defend, you make your own. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to find your own truth or fight for your own home, I hope you'll join our community. Subscribe to the channel and share your own story in the comments below. I read them all. Because every story of survival, of finding light in the darkness, deserves to be heard. You are not alone. My name is Leo Vance. I am Sarah's son, and I am finally home.